It was a crisp autumn morning, and the lobby of Crestwood National Bank was filled with activity. Employees, dressed in sharp suits, moved swiftly behind polished counters, while customers, some impatient and others simply passing the time, waited in line. Among them was Christopher, an elderly black man with a weathered face and a gentle smile. His suit, neatly pressed, was simple yet dignified, and the briefcase he carried looked well used, showing years of service. Christopher walked at a deliberate pace, his cane tapping softly on the marble floors. As Christopher neared the counter, the atmosphere shifted subtly. Two employees, Susan and Mark, both in their mid-30s, exchanged a brief glance. Their polished demeanor faltered ever so slightly, and a small frown appeared on Susan's face. "Can I help you?" Susan asked, her tone somewhat clipped, as Christopher stepped forward. "Yes, young lady," Christopher replied, offering a polite smile. "I would like some assistance with my account." Mark, standing nearby, leaned in and whispered something to Susan, barely audible to the other customers. "Another one of those time wasters," he muttered under his breath. Susan sighed loudly, her impatience clear as she eyed Christopher up and down. "Do you even have an account here?" she asked, her words dripping with condescension. Christopher remained calm, his smile unshaken. "Yes, ma'am, I do. Been a customer here for over 20 years. Susan replied skeptically, "Well, we'll need to see some ID." Christopher pulled out his wallet from his pocket and handed over his identification with steady hands. Susan took it and squinted at it, her expression still dubious. "You sure this is your account?" she asked. Mark, stepping closer, interjected. "We've had some incidents before." Christopher raised an eyebrow but maintained a calm voice. "I'm certain, young man. I've been banking here since before you started working." The subtle insult didn't sit well with Mark. He scoffed and muttered, "Some people think they can just walk in here and waste our time." Susan, emboldened by Mark's attitude, pushed the ID back across the counter. "Look, sir, we're very busy today. Maybe you should come back when you're more prepared." Christopher's expression remained composed, though a flicker of disappointment passed through his eyes. "I am prepared," he said softly. "I'd appreciate it if you could check my account." Instead of responding, Susan motioned to a security guard standing near the entrance. The burly man, his face stern, walked over, his presence adding an unnecessary layer of intimidation. "Is there a problem here?" the guard asked, his voice firm. "No problem," Christopher said evenly. "I'm just trying to access my account." Susan leaned over and whispered something to the guard, who nodded curtly. "Sir, I think it's best if you leave for today," the guard said, gesturing toward the door. Christopher paused for a moment, his grip tightening slightly on his cane. The room seemed to quiet down as other customers noticed the scene. Without raising his voice, Christopher replied, "Are you asking me to leave without resolving my business here?" "Yes," Susan said bluntly. "You're holding up the line." Christopher gazed at her for a long moment, his expression unreadable but steady. After a slight nod, he turned and walked toward the exit, his cane tapping softly once again. As the door closed behind him, the employees resumed their work, oblivious to the storm brewing beneath the surface. Later that day, Christopher entered the bank with a slow, deliberate pace, his hands tucked into the pockets of his overcoat. His posture, slightly stooped with age, contrasted with the glint of wisdom in his eyes. It was late afternoon, and the bank buzzed with activity. Customers lined up at the counters, while bankers in sharp suits moved briskly from desk to desk, attending to clients or making calls. Christopher patiently approached the reception desk, where a young man barely in his mid-20s was scrolling through his phone. His name tag read Ethan. Without looking up, Ethan gestured dismissively and asked, "Yes, what do you need?" Christopher offered a polite smile. "Good afternoon. I was wondering if I could speak to someone about opening a corporate account. I have some business matters to discuss." Ethan finally looked up, his expression immediately turning cold. He scanned Christopher's appearance, the worn coat, the old-fashioned hat, the lack of a briefcase or a luxury watch. A smirk twisted his face. "Corporate account? Are you sure you're in the right place, sir?" he asked, dripping with sarcasm. Christopher didn't let the jab faze him. Yes, I'm sure. I'd like to speak to a manager, if possible. Before Ethan could respond, another employee, a woman named Sophia, overheard the conversation and walked by. She glanced at Christopher, then leaned in to whisper to Ethan, "Does he look like someone who could even afford a corporate account? Probably just wasting our time." Christopher caught the remark, but chose to remain composed. He repeated his request, this time addressing both of them. "I'd appreciate it if someone could assist me. I have all the necessary documents with me." Ethan exchanged a glance with Sophia and rolled his eyes. "Look, sir, this is a high-end financial institution. We don't have time for whatever it is you're trying to do here." The sharpness of Ethan's tone drew attention from other customers and staff nearby. Some whispered among themselves, while others looked visibly uncomfortable. Sophia decided to escalate the situation. She stepped forward, her voice firm but condescending. "Sir, we have policies in place. Without an appointment and proper credentials, we can't entertain requests like yours. And frankly, this branch handles clients of a certain caliber." The words stung, but Christopher maintained his composure. "I understand policies, and I respect them. However, I believe if you take a moment to review my paperwork, you'll see I meet the requirements." Sophia let out a short laugh. "Paperwork? You're kidding, right? Sir, I think it's best if you take your business elsewhere. We're quite busy here." By now, a small crowd had gathered, some customers staring in disbelief at how Christopher was being treated, while others turned away, unwilling to intervene. A middle-aged woman whispered to her companion, "Why are they treating him like that? He hasn't done anything wrong." Ethan, sensing the tension growing, decided to end the interaction. "All right, that's enough," he said loudly. "Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to leave. You're disrupting the workflow here." Christopher hesitated, glancing around at the onlookers. His calm demeanor never faltered, but there was a flicker of disappointment in his eyes. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a neatly folded document. "Perhaps if you look at this, it might clear up any misunderstandings." Ethan barely glanced at the paper before pushing it back toward Christopher. "I said leave. We don't have time for this." Sophia nodded in agreement, stepping closer to Christopher as if to physically usher him out. "You heard him. This isn't the place for you." At that moment, a third employee, a junior banker named Mia, stepped forward hesitantly. She had been watching the interaction from her desk and felt uncomfortable with how things were unfolding. "Maybe we should just take a look at his documents," Mia said softly, addressing Ethan and Sophia. "It won't hurt to check." Ethan shot her a glare. "Mia, stay out of this. We know what we're doing." But Mia persisted, her voice firmer this time. "He's not causing any trouble. He's just asking for assistance. Isn't that our job?" Sophia turned to Mia, her tone icy. "Mia, if you want to waste your time, go ahead. But don't expect us to entertain every random walk-in who thinks they can open a corporate account." The tension in the room was thick, but Christopher, sensing the hostility, decided to step back. "It's all right," he said quietly. "I didn't mean to cause a scene. I'll take my business elsewhere." He turned to leave, his steps slow but dignified. As he reached the door, he paused for a moment, glancing back at the staff who had dismissed him so quickly. There was no anger in his eyes, only quiet sadness. Without another word, he walked out into the cold afternoon, leaving the murmurs of the onlookers behind. Inside, Ethan and Sophia exchanged smug smiles, proud of how they had handled the situation. "People like him think they can just walk in and demand attention," Ethan muttered under his breath. Mia, however, felt a knot of unease form in her stomach. She couldn't shake the feeling that they had made a terrible mistake.